Hello, this is Myra Elaine on the Buying Space channel. Happy Purim. Today is the day that the fast of Esther is observed. This year on the Gregorian calendar, it falls on March 13th. Also today, as people fast and pray and read the book of Esther during Purim, there is a full blood red moon and a lunar eclipse. How neat is that? So it's like God in heaven is observing the fast of Esther to honor the queen that saved her people. So I'm in chapter 2, starting in verse 1. After these events, and those events were Queen Vashti being removed as queen. When the fury of King Xerxes was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed concerning her. I told you he was going to regret it. Then said the king's servants that ministered to him, let there be sought for a king virgins handsome in appearance, and let the king appoint officers to all the provinces of his kingdom, that they might gather together all the young virgins handsome in appearance unto Shusha, the capital, into the house of the women, under the custody of Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of women, and let them give them their customary appointings. Let the maiden who may be pleasing in the eyes of the king become queen instead of Vashti. And speech was pleasing in the eyes of the king, and he did also. There was a certain Jew in Shushan, the capital, whose name was Mordecai, son of Yair, son of Shemuel, son of Kish, a Benjamite. So they were from the tribe of Benjamin, who had carried away unto from Jerusalem with the exiles who had been exiled with Jeroboam, the king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried into exile. So I'm going to stop here for a moment. The Babylonian exile had happened prior to this, and when Cyrus had conquered Babylonia along with a bunch of other kingdoms, and that's how this kingdom of Xerxes came about. And he ruled from India to Ethiopia. So the entire Sinai Peninsula and all of the lament that God promised Abraham was now ruled by Xerxes, who is believed to be the grandson of Cyrus the Great. Now, Cyrus the Great told everybody freed everyone that was in captivity. Not just the Jews, but he freed the Jews and allowed them to return to Jerusalem. But some of the Jews had lived their whole lives in captivity. Um, Mordecai was old enough that he had been, um, he had to have been over 70 because the captivity was 70 years old. So he stayed because that was his home now. And he had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle. So this was the daughter of his uncle. So they were cousins. For she had neither father nor mother, and the maiden was beautiful in form and handsome in appearance. And when her father and mother were dead, Mordecai had taken her to himself as a daughter. I don't know if they had official adoption back then, but he basically acted as her father. And it came to pass when the king's order and his decree were heard, when many maidens were brought together under Shishon, the capital, under the custody of Haggai, that Esther was also brought unto the king's house under custody of Haggai, and the keeper of the women. And the maiden was pleasing to the eyes, and she obtained favor before him. And he made haste to give her appointings and her presents, and 7 maidens who were selected to be given to her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maidens with the best things in the house of the women. So she was immediately recognized as handsome and gracious and charming, and was immediately given favor and given maidens to care for her. Esther said nothing of her people or her descent, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not tell. So that tells me also that Esther was obedient and loyal and took the wisdom of those around her. And day to day did Mordecai walk before the court of the house of women to ascertain the well-being of Esther and what would be done with her. In the town, at every turn, every maiden was to come unto the king Xerxes at the expiration of the time that they had been treated according to the custom of the women. 12 months for were the days of their anointings accomplished. 6 months with all the myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with ointments of the women. So all these women were had spa days every single solitary day and treatments. And Esther had 6 women to help her. Let me see, was it 6? No, it was 7 maidens to help her. And thus came the maiden to the king. Whatever she asked for was given to her to go with her out of the house of the women as far as the house of the king. And in the evening she went, and in the morning she returned unto the second house of the women. So when she was no longer a virgin, she became a concubine. To the custody of Sheshosh Goss, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the concubines. She used not to come again unto the king, except the king delighted in her, and she was called by name. So once you became a concubine, you were taken care of, but you weren't allowed to marry or have your own family. You remained a concubine for the rest of your life. And when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abashit, the uncle of Mordecai, she had taken her to himself a daughter, was to come to go before the king. She required nothing but what the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, said. And Esther obtained grace in the eyes of all that beheld her. So she left it up to the wisdom of the chamberlain, who was the keeper of the house, to provide her with what she needed, because he'd evidently been doing this for years and had this responsibility, and he probably knew what the king liked. So she gave up her choice and humbled herself to receive the best counsel that she could. And Esther was taken unto Xerxes, unto his royal house, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, is the 7th year of his reign. So if you remember in chapter 1 that Vashti was banished in his 3rd year, and they celebrated for 6 months. So this is like 3.5, 4 years later that Esther's being brought before the king. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she was obtained grace and favor before him more than all the virgins. And he placed a royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So I guess Vashti was still the queen until Esther was crowned. And the king made a great feast unto all his princes and servants, and the feast of Esther, which will be celebrated tomorrow on Purim itself, which is Friday, March 14th on our calendar. And he made a release of taxes to the provinces and gave presents according to the ability of the king. So he associated his queen with tax breaks and celebrations for all the people, a chicken in every pot. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, and Mordecai was sitting on the king's gate, Esther had not yet told of her descent with the people, as Mordecai had charged her. And Esther did his commandment of Mordecai, equal as she had under his guardianship. So even though she was queen now, she still listened to Mordecai. So the king had requested a second gathering of virgins, which meant Esther's queenship was not all that stable. Maybe Xerxes was upset that she would not talk about her family or her descent. He was looking at making heirs to take over. There's no mention of any of Vashti's children or if she had children. So it, I don't know. Well, I need to research that a little bit. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting to the king's gate, uh, Bigthan and Tharash, two chamberlains of the king, of those who kept the door, became wroth, and sought to lay hand on King Xerxes. The thing became known to Mordecai, and he told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther said it to the king in the name of Mordecai. And the thing that inquired unto and found true. So this was told to the king, and it was investigated, and it was found to be true. And they were both of them hanged in the gallows, and it was written in the book of Chronicles before the king. So Mordecai saved the king's life. Mordecai probably looks at the king now as like a son-in-law, because he's married Esther, who he treated like a daughter, even though they were cousins. So now he has vested interest to love his king and to protect him, because Esther's fate will go along with whatever happens to King Xerxes, the grandson of Cyrus the Great. So he's gone, even though he can't tell anyone. He knows that, in a way, he's part of the royal family now, and he's treating Xerxes, his adoptive son-in-law, as he should, with respect and protection. And he saved his life. And the king doesn't even know that that's like his father-in-law. And I think that's why King Xerxes rounded up more virgins, because he has a real issue because of Vashti defying him, that he doesn't like any deceit or any type of defiance. Esther was loyal and true in every aspect, except that she would have followed Mordecai's instructions not to talk about her people. And that was probably frustrating to the king. So there was a little bit of conflict between the king and queen, even early on, because of the secret. So I'm going to go ahead and start chapter 3 in the next reading. I'm going to do multiple readings today. Purim this year is actually 3 days, and I'll explain that a little later on, how that came about, because the way things fell on the calendar. And of course, we have the wonderful blood moon and the lunar eclipse during the fast today. And how glorious is that? I mean, it's like the dates are mentioned here, that Esther went to the king. God laid all this out, all these events out, so that Esther could be put in a position to save the Jews. You all have a wonderful and blessed day.